Even in texts, in books that you'll read, even fairly recently, people discuss mankind and discussing him, he, okay, instead of we. So this gendering in books and in consciousness and in screenplay, even in fairy tales, sort of folk tales, sort of like storytelling, all denigration. There's interesting denigration throughout the whole thing. How did I get onto that subject?
When laying out the spreads, will tarot often repeat the same theme throughout a reading? Where I did one during the week where I did a dead reckoning and a stargate, and it looked like the stargate was basically repeating the dead reckoning.
More often, those cards are separated and they come back together again. It's the easier that person's life is going to be. The more straightforward, it hasn't got all these raggedy edges. When I am reading for a person who's got raggedy edges and every spread is different, he tends to go, yeah, your life's a fucking mess. So the repetitions are very interesting, and tarot will continue to tell you the same information.
It was interesting because the dead reckoning, it opened up with an 8 of Swords crossed with the Tower,
Woo!
and it was someone I knew, and I thought, oh no. It was a domestic violence court verdict date that she had just found out about the day before I did the readings, and it had the devil in, I think, future. Oh, that was in the next second part of the dead reckoning, but it did seem to be repeating. But when it came up again, similar theme in the Stargate, I didn't know if I was overlaying myself onto the Stargate reading, because the dead
Kind of
reckoning.
question yourself, seriously? You'll be pulling everything you've learned, everything you know, and then yes, you may very well question yourself, but you're going to go ahead and say it anyway because you see it.
The dead reckoning spreads felt comfortable, but the Stargate, I felt a bit of a disconnect with it. Didn't feel like it was flowing as well.
It's very interesting because the Stargate can have superimposures. First imposure will be the events that will be mirrored, for example, in the Dead Reckoning, and then it wants to talk about the person's health, so it's going to change the subject and discuss health problems because that's the body of Adam Cadmon, and it's going, oh, there's a little bit of a glitch happening in one of your shoulders, for example, or back of your neck, the head, the teeth. It'll show that anything that's happening to do with the gut, the uterus. Of course, that'll be around Yesod in the tree. So that'll be your second superimposure. A third superimposure can very often be events on a worldwide ecological or environmental level, but not that's coming from a news broadcast. They will come from the fact of, for example, like the earthquake that took out Fukushima, that took out New Zealand in 2011. These will show up. 2008, for example, it'll show up all through the Stargate was showing up the volcanic eruptions. And that happened in Chile, and of course it happened in Reykjavik. So it's going to superimpose three layers, and you'll be about to put your cards away, and you go, oh, hang on, there's another story, and it'll bring the other story in. Won't do that mostly in the Dead Reckoning, and it also won't do it in Question Time or other things, but it will definitely do it in the Stargate. It's also kaleidoscopic insofar as it's the same pieces that'll show themselves in different designs each time. That'll give you a variation of the theme perhaps that it was before. It's almost like a Rubik's Cube looking to get all the colours lined up. And then there'll be the people that'll ask you questions when you get to question time at the end, and everything's already been answered. Bit for bleh. Because I mean, some people will say, "Oh, tell me about the love of my life." I go, "Pardon? What the fuck does that mean?" Love of your life could have been a canary you had when you were 6. Shut up, Kate. And you too, Nishka. Look at you. Look. Yes, you've all heard that one before. It's really sad that people have been led to believe that Disneyfication, and it's very dangerous. Just a little point to put in their little notebooks, please. If you think your client is being an idiot, it will respond accordingly. and it will throw out a shocker. If a person has, for example, or it can do all kinds of odd things, but if a person's question has been answered time and time again and they still ask it, like, am I going to meet the love of my life? You'll get a Tower, Ten of Swords, Five of Swords, Seven of Swords, Two of Swords. You'll get the Devil card turn up. You'll get the Three of Swords turn up. You'll get the Seven of Cups turn up. You'll get the Six of Cups turn up. You go, what the fuck am I looking at? And then you go, oh, you're just being a facetious bastard. And I'll actually say that to my client. They'll go, tarot's being really rude to you. And they'll go, what could have possibly said this so rude? I go, look, you have had the answer during the reading. Tarot is being really rude to you because you are asking a stupid question. Work for the day? What's the time? Are we gonna get through this? We've got a lot of fucking work to do.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Swords.
Ready, set, cards.
Swords. Now I don't put these in order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace. They're just as they come, okay? So you're going to need to write them down just as they come. Sometimes I'll let you know in advance. If I see 2 or 3 cards and I think they're going to go together with this or that or something else, I'm going to probably bring that up. I will attempt not to so that you've got them. Okay. Two of Swords. I don't see. Indecision. Can be eyesight difficulties, particularly if it falls with the Star card. Can be peace of mind because you're living by the sea. Can also be willful lack of ability or desire to communicate anything with anybody. The Two of Swords can represent silence. And of course I'm going to miss out on different meanings that I may have come to before that will be in the books because it changes all the time. There's your Two of Swords. Okay. Four of Swords. Nothing. That's its main meaning. Nothing, nothing. Wait, do nothing, nothing's happening. It can be resting because it's not traumatic like the Nine of Swords, but it can be resting. It can be the visitation to a mausoleum at the time of Samhain or at the Mexican Day of the Dead, for example. But that's rare. You won't get that often. So it's not much. Four of Swords is nothing. It can be time sequences. There are very, very few of these journey cards that represent time sequences, but this is one. This can be 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 months, or 4 years. It can turn up as wait, as warning. If a person's going to do a deal, for example, to do with property, and this turns up at the very, very foundation of the answer, it's going to say wait. Page of Swords. Page of Swords can be a small child. They can be, and I say can be because not always, Aquarius, Gemini, or Libran child, or the child of one of those star signs. Can also be a white dog, but never a big one. Unless it falls with the Strength card, in which case it's going to be a fucking horse. Sorry, that's funny, but it's true.
But not a literal horse? Or
no, if it falls with the Strength card, it'll be a big horse.
Like a
horse. Or a
okay.
A greyhound. Falls with the Lovers card, it's time of Gemini. Falls with the Justice card, it's the time of Libra. Falls with the Star card, it's the time of Aquarius. And when the timings turn up, it's wonderful. Because it takes a lot of pressure off, because you can tell the person the exact date sometimes. If it was, for example, look at that. That'd be the 4th of February, wouldn't it? If it had a Star card with this time of Aquarius, it's not the 4th of January, it's not the 4th of March, that's the 4th of February. Five of Swords. Conflict, argument. aggression, tension, always conflict. Now, it can be all kinds of arguments. If it falls with a justice card, it's a legal argument. If it falls with the 5 of Wands, that's a strike, a union strike. Yes, I've seen it turn up for people that are working in martial arts, but in martial arts it's usually going to be the 4 of Wands, sorry, the 5 of Wands, because martial arts are never this aggressive. So it's fighting. It's going to turn up very regularly with domestic abuse, very regularly with a parent who's in strife because they don't know how to deal with their adolescent offspring. And conflict is usually because people are not listening. Who's not listening? Why does a fight become violent? Or somebody could be up. You can get it with a devil card and 7 of Cups, which means somebody's up their tits on something. And if they're on speed, which would be the 5 of Swords with the Knight of Swords and the 7 of Cups, that aggression is going to be part and parcel of the fact they've just snorted too much. 5 of Swords, conflict. Now, the Tenor Sword. This is like, oh, here we go. 10 of Swords can be chiropractics. It can be acupuncture. It can be tattoo. Similarly, it can be violence. It can be absolutely terrible. It would depend on the cards around it. All of these are going to depend on the cards around it, which is what Shell was talking about earlier when she was saying that the cards repeat themselves. Everybody's reading will be different, and everything will depend on what's around it. So the 10 of Swords is betrayal, can be knives in the back, can be back pain, and very often it's going to, if it turns up with a Lover's card, it's sciatica. Because the Lover's cards can be the hips, it's the split left and right side of your body. You also get this with teenage kids who are cutting themselves. So if it turns up with a Page of Swords, you're going to go, what's this all about? Particularly if it's got a 2 of Swords with it. Let's have a little look at this. I don't want to be doing this I could do this forever, non-stop. This could be one of several things depending on how it falls. Now, you're going to know, this is the freak out about tarot. You're going to know when you get the spread and you've got the person in front of you that you are right. You're going to know in difference to the next person who may get the same 3. And this is where it gets a bit tricky knowing this. This can be an infant who is teething and cannot tell you that they're in pain. For example, any of the pages can be children, yes? They can be very small children. The 2 of Swords is an inability to communicate. Silence. Or they can be very loud in that silence, so they could be screaming their bloody heads off, but at the same time they can't tell you, Mama or Papa, I've got a pain in my foot, or my tooth is coming through my gum and I can't really stand the pain, but they will let you know. So that's when that child is silently in pain, or in some way inability to communicate the sensations of pain. When it turns up with an adolescent, and when it's an adolescent, of course, you're going to see all the surrounding cards are going to represent that. You're going to see somebody who's like, what happens when a 14-year-old's 14, for goodness sakes? Although nowadays it can be a 10-year-old. It's when they're not saying, but they can express their trauma through the 10 of Swords. So you'll get it with a teenager who's cutting themselves. Oh, will you get it with bullying? Oh, fuck yes. This is also a situation, but again, you'll have your devil cards around it. You'll have a lot of abuse cards around it. This is when a child is being battered or beaten and has been silenced. 3 of Swords. 3 of Swords means ultimately separation. Now that separation can be, very often, I would say 80% of the time that separation will be when a family group or a couple or a relationship is over. But it can just as easily turn up when a child is first born and is separated from mama's umbilicus. It can also turn up when you have a basal cell carcinoma cut out of your body, or anything cut from your body that needs to come out. It can be a heart attack particularly if it fucking turns up with the Tenor Sword. It's like, it can be, particularly if it falls in there with a 9 of Swords or an 8 of Cups. It's some terrible grief. 5 of Cups, terrible grief through loss, separation, any form of separation. I mean, I could keep going with your meanings all afternoon, but it could end up being just annoying and you've got too much information. A lot of this you'll find in the actual tarot book, but it's easy to look at here because in the tarot book I haven't got the rights to publish the Rider-Waite Tarot, so I've needed to compromise. Yeah, it was the same with Tarot Theory and Practice. Llewellyn couldn't get the rights to the Rider-Waite Tarot, so they put in their Llewellyn Tarot. It's sort of, this is the one that works because it's familiarity. Over a period of time, the familiarity is what teaches us. Okay, now Ace of Swords. So let's go with its sweetness. This can be your chef's knives. I actually fucking love this tarot. This card has taught me so much. This is an interesting one. When I first, I think, moved to Victoria and I'm seeing it, I couldn't quite work out what it was. And this is when, in the 80s, early 80s, was when a lot of people were doing communal living and getting blocks of land and that had been just bush before that. So this is when they make the bush track clear, the driveway clear, and it's also the fences. Please write that down, because even a person living down the road from where I am now has been having an 8-year crisis with their neighbour over the fence.
And also clearing bush tracks, you said?
Yeah, it's to create a driveway in a bush environment. It's not clearing the bush track, it's the track itself. Yeah. All right. Ace of Swords can be severance. It has got a philosophy, but it's sort of like a bit old hat. The philosophy of the concept of a double-edged blade. Sort of like the concept of balance. It's a bit. Tarot's changed its tune with me now. It's just like, that's a bit passé. We did that back 20 years ago. It can be intercontinental ballistic missile, particularly if it turns up with a tower. Ace of Swords can also simply be a decision. Sometimes a person will ask a question, and if it's free choice question, this is going to be your foundation. It says decide. You decide. So you can hand back the decision to the actual person that you're sitting with. Ace of Swords can be any form of cutting. It can also be needles. That can be a little vax thing right there. It's probably 40 years since I saw it with the Empress cards, and it ended up being an IVF, a pipette. Yeah, there's a lot of other meanings, but it's going to depend on what it falls with, which is, again, this is tricky because all you're getting right now is just the various meanings. What is it, Nila? I can hear you.
I was just thinking about someone who's a diabetic.
It'll turn up.
I've had it come with that, and also with people who have a relationship with somebody who has a heroin addiction, or that being there somehow, as well as hairdressers.
Yeah, that'll turn up with the clusters. This one is going to be, if it's going to turn up with the Devil card and it's going to turn up with the 7 of Cups, just as an example, that's definitely somebody who's using a needle for intravenous drug use. Indifference to snorting something, indifference to making a tea of something. King of Swords is going to be either your fair-skinned, fair-haired man or woman. Now, here's where we get interesting. This is where you need to be very careful to stop gendering. I mean, apart from the genitalia, it's really important to understand that, apart from the biology, it's really important to understand that there is no skill that is not capable by both genders or all genders. And therefore, what is kingly and what is queenly? You get me? This is a big one to consider. And I will have a person turn up with both the king and the queen together. So that's a person of swords. So I moved to Melbourne and I get very involved with the LGBTQI community, and all my concepts of kings and queens goes down the toilet, flushed away. If the person is in a relationship that's the same-sex relationship, this is quite often the person who is seemingly the more dominant of the two. 9 of Swords.
Well, you didn't say it was, it's an air sign person though, right? Aquarius, Gemini, Libra?
Yeah, okay, we'll just get straight so I don't have to bother about repeating myself. The air sign person, if it's with a Lover's card, it's a Gemini. If it's with a Justice card, it's a Libra, and if it's with a Star card, it's an Aquarian. So that's just right across the board. It becomes only tricky when, if I'm reading for a person who is a Gemini and their partner's a Gemini. That gets tricky. Just something in you says they can't have that card because that's you. So they're going to be presented as being a different card besides that one. And then you've got to say, oh, this person, if it's, say it's a queen or a person of pentacles, they're going to say they're practical, they're earthy, they're grounded, they're really, really good at doing your books. And they're also reliable. Nine of Swords. You know that when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you go, oh, fuck, I got to get the kids to school tomorrow and I really don't know what to do about that, no matter, you toss and you turn and you go, I can't go back to sleep at all. That's your Nine of Swords. The Nine of Swords is also that ominous feeling of dread you get when somebody's coming to visit you that you wish wouldn't. The Nine of Swords says that no matter what you know, you are still on alert. No matter even when you're safe, you are still on alert. This can be very much hypervigilance. Tarot is very compassionate. It'll say, particularly when it's a foundation or it's a very strong place, it says your capacity to worry is your capacity to get things done. You've just got to remind them to write shit down so that they don't leave the worry ethereal. If that worry remains airborne and it doesn't you don't collapse the wave with it, that worry will then create stresses in the self and the body and relationships. The Nine of Swords is somebody who's sick, yes. Nine of Swords can just simply be someone who's in recovery, yes. The Nine of Swords can be someone who is bedridden and stressed out to the max with it, yes. Nine of Swords can be somebody who knows what's going on and is dreading telling the police. The Nine of Swords is every parent who's ever got woken up at fucking 3 o'clock in the morning going, why the fuck did I have a baby? Am I ever going to sleep again? No. That's pretty much the Nine of Swords. Yes, there's other meanings, but they'll come together with other cards. Your patterns. Queen of Swords, ditto the King of Swords. Seven of Swords. Now, I do tend to love and despise this. Now, the Seven of Swords, the first thing I'd like you to understand is that if you have an enemy and you just go attacking, I could spend years on this one. What is the person doing? They've got a bundle of swords in their arms and they're sneaking away from where they've been, looking behind them with a smug look on their face as if to say, I've got your swords. Nya, 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 nya. Sun Tzu's Art of War says, what's the best way of getting rid of an argument, which is your Five of Swords, is to use a Seven of Swords. And this is your forensic art of discrimination. For example, Pat Rafter, who's a tennis player. So Pat Rafter is coming up for a big match against a mortal enemy. They can sit in their lounge room and go, I'm just going to watch Neighbours. Or they can employ the Seven of Swords. And the Seven of Swords is when they study their opponent's moves. The same thing would apply if you were going to go into debate or discussion on any circumstance. You would study beforehand. This is serious research. So the Seven of Swords is when you remove the arguments from the opponent. See? It's sort of obvious. Because the other thing this Seven of Swords is a thief. Someone who's casing your joint. Someone who's sneaking around figuring out how many computers they can steal from the school. It's like with an Ace of Swords, with a Devil card. It's someone who likes to give out tastes of a certain kind of drug in the park to the kids. It's also a person who is grooming children for sexual exploitation. But it would depend on what it falls with. This one will also turn up with the Justice card for a lawyer, someone who is doing their research into their opponent's motivation and all of the information that's available to them. You getting the feeling for it? Yep. So the variations of all those themes are significant. Okay, Six of Swords. Manila. I can't get to Arizona yet. Six of Swords' first and primary connection is a journey over water. It's also a time sequence. 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years. It's one of our time sequence cards. It also represents a journey away from danger, or a journey out of despair. It can represent the catchphrase from troubled waters to calm. The Six of Swords is going to turn up with the Moon card and the Hangman for someone who's fishing. Six of Swords is going to turn up with the Moon card and the Hangman for somebody who's diving. The Six of Swords is going to turn up with a person who works on the water, a yacht, a ferry, a kayak, a surfboard, a surf ski. Don't get daunted, because it becomes easier to recognize them once they turn up on the table.
I see it a lot.
The meanings yet? What was that?
Oh, I just see it all the time at the market, because people come on the ferry from the North Island.
That's it. It's just it'll be the ferry ride.
Oh, you're from the North Island.
If it turns up with the star card, it's flight, overseas flight. Because the star card can represent airplanes. So it's overseas travel in that instance. Knight of Swords. The essence of the knights, by the way, are never people. Just be real clear about that. They're movements. So the Knight of Swords is ultimately, in a way, in a word, in an essence, speed. That can be fast horses, can be greyhounds, can be Celtic lurchers, can be the drug speed. The number of times I have suggested, because of the warning spread, for people to please drive slowly. And the number of times they've come back to me and said, oops, we didn't listen. It's just like, it's unbelievable. For people from the Byron region know someone named Mandy Nolan. And Mandy Nolan ended up not only speeding but losing all her points, and she ended up putting a sign on the visor above her windscreen that says there's a cop around every corner. And yes, it can represent the word fast, not as in food fasting, but going faster. It does represent a vehicle, but if it's a vehicle, it's a push bike, a motorbike, or a scooter like a Vespa. It will represent horse riding if it falls with the Strength card, and particularly if it sits in the sphere of good, which is to do with Mercury. Eight of Swords. Now, the Eight of Swords is not always a problem, but very often it's a problem. The Eight of Swords is being stuck. It is what it looks like. I'm all tied up and I haven't got a way out. This is as much a person who takes on a mortgage as a person with a Justice card who goes to prison. Once you've had children, the Eight of Swords will live with you forever and ever and ever. So in that instance, it is a commitment that we are agreeing to. But the Ace of Swords pretty much says you can't move. Some people, if they're talking about moving house and whatever, this one turns up, it's not going to happen. Somebody in 2019 contacted for a reading, and they're a world traveller. They like to travel all the time. And the Eight of Swords was the foundation to do with the next trip. Said, you're not going anywhere. And then, of course, COVID hit and they didn't go anywhere.
But it's feeling stuck as well, rather than just being stuck.
No, it's being stuck.
It's being stuck. Great.
Because if you feel stuck, you are stuck. And there's actually a story around this which I find quite fascinating, and apparently it's based on a true story, and it's called the story of the Gordian knot. So when this one is fabulous when it turns up, and it will often, because tarot will work with you and will work with your clients. If it turns up with this, look at these two together. It says you're stuck in it. You've got the tool to get yourself out of it. The story of the Gordian knot is this king says, oh, look, I just don't want to be a king anymore. So puts a rope across the front of their kingdom and says you can have it. Anybody who can get past the rope can have the lot. There you go. And ties this incredibly extraordinary knot in the two halves of the rope. And for years and years and years and years and years, everybody tries to undo the knot so that they can score the kingdom for their own. And nobody can undo the knot. It's too complicated. And then one person comes along one day on their what? And what do they do?
White horse.
What do they
on
do?
their on their Knight of Swords.
Because the king
On their
never,
bicycle.
because the king never said you had to undo the knot. Just if you can get past the rope, you can have the lot. So that's where the Knight of Swords comes along and says, oh, all right, I'm on my fast horse. Here I come. And I just go, slice right through the rope. And therefore, the Eight of Swords is moot. Happiness. Okay. That's swords in a nutshell. Everybody still okay? We'll go on to pentacles. Swords can very often essentially be difficult. That's the best way to describe them.